Hello. So, City emailed me many weeks ago, I think, to ask if I'd do this short talk, and somehow I missed it. I missed the email. And about a week ago, I was just tidying up my emails before I came away I'm going on solitary for 3 weeks from tomorrow, and saw this email from City, will you do a short personal talk? And I thought, oh no, I've not responded. So I said, I'm really sorry, it's a bit short notice now. I'm sure you've got someone else. And then I arrived here on Thursday and saw City and apologised that I'd missed that email. And I said, let me know if you need anything then. She said, well, yeah, short talk. I was like, okay, fair. So I think the reason I'm telling you that is because I think a number of years ago, I would have felt an awful lot of fear at the thought of giving a short talk in 2 or 3 days' time and being up front without having reflected for a long time about what I might say and, Yeah, so I think that does show me that, Dharma practice does work, and it's possible to work with fear and for our sort of relationship with fear to change, yeah. So for me, one of the main contexts that I've experienced, in a way, had a lot of training for this, is Karana appeals. So I worked for the Karana Trust for about 8 years. So I was involved in probably around 15 door-to-door campaigns, and also did solo fundraising in Nottingham, where I lived, for nearly 2 years. So I've knocked on a lot of doors. I've met a lot of strangers and I've asked them for money. And when I first agreed to do a Karana appeal, I was very, very inspired to do it for the cause. And I was also inspired because I'd heard that Karana appeals were this context for intensity and transformation. And I thought, yes. So that's why I put myself forward. And I totally hadn't thought about the fact that I had to ask for money. I just thought, great context, doing things for others. Yeah, great, I'll do that. And it was only really when I got there that I realised I've got to fundraise. So I was someone quite shy, quite unconfident, and the thought of meeting strangers and asking for money then suddenly became very terrifying. But I have to say, it's such a wonderful context to train in that, these 6 weeks, you're very, very held, very supported. And you just gain a lot of tools to work with fear in many different ways, yeah. So some of those tools, the ones that we've already heard about this weekend, the obvious ones of awareness and kindness. So I remember a number of times standing on people's doorsteps and just closing my eyes and getting in touch with my body and feeling this sense of, feeling like my feet weren't on the ground. It's almost like I was kind of floating. There's a lot of sort of heightened sensations in my body, my heart beating really fast. And just standing there and trying to feel my feet on the ground and breathe and soften my belly. So, some of the trainers also ask us to notice, what's going on. There's that sort of tightness and holding, and can you just sort of soften? So just bringing a lot of kindness, a lot of awareness to bodily sensations. And in that way, sort of working with the gap through interactions with others. But also bringing that awareness and kindness to the person that we're meeting. So as well as kind of being in touch with what was going on for me, I had to be in touch with the person who's there in front of me. So there's this kind of almost sometimes this sort of dance of like awareness and kindness towards sort of self and other. And as that, I think as I continued training in that, I became more able to sort of hold both. And also there's a very important third aspect, which is the cause. So for me, this is really what helped me work with the fear more than anything, was the fact that I was motivated to raise money for people that really needed it. So anytime I had fear or resistance to knocking on doors, I would just bring to mind the women in India who were practicing manual scavenging, as part of in order to survive. And the fact that if they were able to be knocking on these doors and asking for money, I'm sure they would be. And that's what kind of motivated me again and again to do the practice. Interestingly, I was on an appeal in Birmingham many years ago, and it was when Bantu was still living in Birmingham, and our appeal team went to see him. And we got really excited, like, what can we ask Bantu about? Like, let's ask him why he thinks Karana appeals are so transformative. And we did this session, like, coming up with all these ideas of why we thought it was. You know, you get reflected back and da-da-da-da. And we went to see him and we said, oh, Bantu, why do you think Karana appeals are so transformative? And he said so simply, because you're doing it for others. And you're doing it whether you are of the temperament or not. And you're doing it whether you're scared or not, you're doing it anyway. So yeah, feel the fear and do it anyway. Which felt really, really relevant on those appeals, yeah. I also used to, and still do, sort of call for help, so mantra and ritual to connect, and just to remember actually that the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are there blessing us all the time, and we just need to sort of keep remembering to be open to that and receptive to that, and then that support can come through us if we remember that. So for me, it would sometimes be calling on green Tara if I felt I needed to be soothed a bit more. And it'd sometimes be calling on Padmasambhava if I felt I needed a bit more energy and challenge and kind of virya, yeah. And all of that was held in the context of this community where we'd get this wonderful training. And one of my strongest memories was on my first appeal a few weeks in, where there was a conflict between a couple of people on the team. And I remember sat there feeling really nervous, but also feeling a bit uncomfortable that I didn't quite agree with what someone was saying. And I remember the trainer, Kemajala, he just looked at me and very kindly went and gave me a nod. And what he was doing was encouraging me to speak into that space. So he could obviously see that I was in a lot of fear, but that something was going on for me and that there was something that I needed to say. And it was so kind and so helpful, very gently encouraging, just to kind of speak from that place, yeah. So I really encourage you to do Karana appeals. You can find out more if you Google Karana appeals, you'll find out more, but they are really wonderful, yeah. So that was one little thing I wanted to share. The other thing I thought I'd share with you is just a tendency that I've worked with for a number of years, and I think it is probably my root samskara, I would say. And that's a fear of getting things wrong. Obviously not rational. I didn't used to quite name it as such. It's clarified actually over the last sort of few years that that's what the kind of the fear's called. So some of the ways it plays out, perfectionism, people pleasing, low confidence or self-esteem, feeling like I'm not good enough. I remember my friend Jinnaraja when I was quite early on, when I was sort of practicing the Dharma, and he said to me, you know, you might meet some people who don't like you. And I was shocked. I was like, and I remember like taking that in and feeling like really scared that there might be people that didn't like me, and like that I was going to have to come to terms with that. And I think as I practiced more, I just started to become more aware of what was happening for me in those moments, all of those moments of people pleasing or perfectionism, or what I see now, because obviously it still happens, but it's just my working with it is different. But I can feel sort of anxious and overwhelmed, and I just get very, very speedy and think that I have to do more. Okay, I've got to do more, rather than coming back to my experience, it like goes outward and like do more. So I just became curious and a bit more aware of what happens for me. And what I noticed was this real fear of, or embarrassment around if I got things wrong. And actually the word that came, and it's not a word that I use in my everyday language, was mortification. I'd be mortified if I get things wrong. And I think that's so interesting, because obviously there's all the sort of associations with death and with that word. And I just thought, gosh, how interesting that that's the word that came, mortification. feeling mortified. So I realised that, oh, this is something quite sort of existential. There's something here that's quite kind of deep and yucky. So in 2023, I was on the team at Akashavana for the ordination retreat. And as a team, we were, sometimes in our team meetings, we were practicing the reaction practice together. So noticing a particular reaction we were having and just really exploring that and trying to get to the root of that and what view's underneath it. So I was having a reaction not to someone on the retreat, but to something that had happened outside of the retreat, and it was still playing over a lot in my mind, and I could feel it was kind of affecting the retreat for me. So we started to explore it together and sort of find out like what's actually happening here. And I got to this root view that I had this, it was a fear that I'm going to get things wrong. And I remember Subhadramati got really excited. She was like, ooh. Ooh. And then she was like, oh, well, what's the worst thing that will happen if you get it wrong? You know, she was like really just trying to get to like, what is that? What is that about? What's happening there? And so the team were gently asking me these questions, and, you know, I'm sort of trying to go deeper with it. And what I got to was a fear that I will shrivel up and disappear. I don't know where that came from. I'd never experienced that before, but that was the fear, like I'll shrivel up and disappear if I get things wrong. And the image came, I don't know if some of you know, in the Harry Potter film where Harry sort of finally kills Voldemort, and there's that part of him, part of Voldemort sort of in King's Cross Station. That's the image that came, this sort of, you know, this sort of real sort of shriveled, sort of vulnerable. I've actually made that out of Play-Doh, and it's on my mantelpiece, this tiny little orange little shriveled Voldemort, and it's getting really dried up, which somehow is like appropriate. So yeah, I just started to ask questions then, is that true? And I just, in that way, just started to loosen and just see through that view a bit more. So I think just one of the things I really wanted to say was this thing of right view, just like a dharmic perspective, like there might be something happening on an emotional level, but rationally just being able to see that and ask, like, is that really true? And just getting confidence in our own sort of experience. So for me, what came out of that was realising, well, there's right and wrong is just an arbitrary thing anyway. You know, there are just conditions, and actually what I can trust is skillfulness. So I can trust ethics, I can trust the kusala, and it's going to be much more helpful if I think of things as skillful or unskillful than as right or wrong, and that's something that I can really have confidence in. So I think partly this is where my name comes from, the kusala part of my name, that I really love and respond to ethics as a training practice, and that we can learn, we can really trust skillfulness, we can learn it. It's not like we're either skillful or we're not, we're like, yeah, so it's like there's something about being able to get things wrong, try things, practice them, get more sensitive to like what is skillfulness and what is unskillfulness. The other sort of motivating factor for me, again, in working with this fear, has been other people. So what I realised is this fear can turn outwards. So as well as feeling that I get things wrong, it can sort of be projected onto others and feeling like having high standards for others as well. So I think what I've really touched into here is like this fear, this is still a very tender one, and this fear of my capacity to harm others, which is so far from my ideal. It's so far from what I want to do, and yet I'm human and I have to acknowledge that that is there. Yeah. So I think within all that, of course, like if we can just hold that with kindness, for me, like what can come rather than feeling I've got it wrong again, I'm a terrible person, is like this source of faith, like, oh, now I've seen that, I can transform it. It's like I don't have to, it doesn't have to keep driving my behaviour anymore. And if I don't turn towards that, the fear of those behaviours that might harm others, and kindly acknowledge them and really understand them and start to see them more, then how are they going to transform? So yeah, this fear to look really deeply at our tendencies. So confession practice has helped me a lot with this. Being able to confess some of those areas and then just being met and held with love and awareness, and then letting it go. So like loosening the grip of that again and again. Yeah, so maybe I'll just finish with this. Just something about getting a more objective perspective of ourselves and others. So rather than me seeing some things as right and wrong, just getting this more objective perspective, seeing things more clearly through sort of more the eyes of right view. And what that leads me to do is just be much more playful and light and loose, and be able to get things wrong and be willing to apologise and be willing to sort of play a bit, rather than feeling like there's these fixed kind of ways of being for me and others. So yeah, my two sort of things that I hold on to are hold things lightly and trust yourself. They're my kind of mantras, as it were.